The knife that I wave around at random has returned. Long live the knife that I wave around at random. Hello everyone, so in real life Article 5 is part of the NATO Charter where it says if one member is invaded they can request that all of the other members come to their aid. I'm not talking about that today, I'm talking about Article 5, the book series written by Kristen Simmons. I figure at least one person probably clicked on this video not knowing that and was very confused, so I just wanted to clarify. If you were looking for like geopolitical analysis or something, I don't blame you for clicking away now. So I'm back with another weird Hunger Games ripoff from the early 2010s. This one is called Article 5. It's about what happens when you let religious conservatives have power. And I think the best way to introduce it is just to read the summary of the first book. New York, Los Angeles, and Washington, D.C. have been abandoned. The Bill of Rights has been revoked and replaced with the moral statutes. There are no more police. Instead, there are soldiers. There are no more fines for bad behavior. Instead, there are arrests, trials, and maybe worse. People who get arrested usually don't come back. 17-year-old Ember Miller is old enough to remember that things weren't always this way. Living with her rebellious single mother, it's hard for her to forget people weren't always arrested for reading the wrong books or staying out after dark. It's hard to forget that life in the United States used to be different. Ember has perfected the art of keeping a low profile. She knows how to get the things she needs, like food stamps and hand-me-down clothes, and how to pass the random home inspections by the military. Her life is as close to peaceful as circumstances allow. That is, until her mother is arrested for non-compliance with Article 5 of the Moral Statutes, and one of the arresting officers is none other than Chase Jennings, the only boy Ember has ever loved. That is actually a pretty good summary. Like, it's intriguing and it pulls me in and makes me want to read and find out more about what's going on. Now, this isn't some fictional country far in the future, which is where most terrible young adult dystopias take place. It is in the United States, and it's only a few decades in the future. It's not that far from right now. And rather than just being about a made-up problem that's just an excuse to show teenagers overthrow the evil government, like in stuff like Matched and Hunger, it's commenting on a real social/political issue. Christian conservatives are insane control freaks that want to use the government to kill people that they don't like. Please note I said Christian conservative, not Christians, because I'm referring to a specific political ideology. And honestly, even other Christians hate those guys. Like, whatever issues I have with Christianity as an ideology, I know its followers have a very broad spectrum of beliefs, and I know most of them are totally normal people. I shouldn't focus on the Christians here, though, because this is the same problem that every religion has. You know, assholes ruin it for the ones that are just trying to be normal. I mean, hell, even in the books we're going to be talking about, there are characters that have a pendant of Saint Michael, and that's considered contraband. So it's saying Catholics and other types of Christians who are the wrong kind of Christian are also oppressed. And I hate that I have to spend time clarifying this, but religious conservatives really love to pretend that you're attacking all of them and you're attacking all of followers of their religion when you're just criticizing them. And some of you also might think I'm being harsh, but remember how many people Christian conservatives kill on a regular basis. Like, how many people have died from medical issues because they like to ban abortion in all cases as soon as they get the chance? How many times have they shot up nightclubs, or bombed the Olympics, or murdered doctors, or shot up synagogues and churches? Like, it happens a fair amount. Religious conservatives, again, regardless of what religion we're talking about, think God or some equivalent of God is on their side and there's no line they won't cross in pursuit of their monstrous goals. Like, it's an ideology that does bad things every time it comes to power, no matter where they are or what religion they follow. And even setting that aside, they're just kind of annoying. You know, they're moralizing busybodies. Remember when they claimed the Olympics were satanic because the opening ceremony had a reference to Marie Antoinette? Or how they keep banning books for the crime of featuring gay people? Publishing Article 5 could have resulted in these people making a big stink, so it's kind of ballsy for a trend-chasing young adult novel to make these guys the villains. Unfortunately, it's really only in the first book that we really have to focus on and reconcile with the fact that these guys are basically just the American version of the fucking Taliban. It's never really explored, and after that they become very generic bad guys. And more than anything else in this book series, that disappointed me. So I actually read the first book in this way back in 2019. I've spoken about it a little bit, but I've never done an entire video dedicated to it until now, which is the same reason that I never finished the series. It had some neat ideas, but the story itself was not neat, you know? I just didn't feel like putting in the time and effort of reading the last 2 books in the trilogy if the concepts brought up weren't going to be explored and the characters were just so boring. But I have been covering more of these weird, terrible young adult dystopias lately, and I was a little bit curious about what happens after book 1. And I don't like leaving things unfinished, you know? I don't like starting a series if I'm not going to finish it unless the first book is really, really bad. So I just eventually decided, okay, I'm going to cover Article 5. And I will say, because I reread the whole thing. I reread book 1 and then I went on to books 2 and 3. I will say I liked book 1 more this time around, but it's still not great, and I can say that the sequels are even worse. There's not much to hate here, but there's not much to love either. Overall, it's, like I said, it's a crappy ripoff of The Hunger Games with a few standout moments and a few standout ideas. I don't recommend reading it, but I do recommend watching this video so you know that there are a few things worth knowing. Alright, 2 more things before we really start getting into this. I just wanted to say that it annoys me when the first book in a series has a number in the title and that number isn't 1. You know, it just throws me off a little bit. Stuff like Article 5, Fourth Wing, I Am Number 4, or The Fifth Sorceress, you know? Like, it's just kind of annoying. And it's even worse in this case because Article 5 is the name of the first book, and it's also the name of the series. So it goes Article 5 number 1, Breaking Point, Article 5 number 2, and 3, Article 5 number 3. Yes, the last book is just called 3. Like, you weren't even fucking trying at that point, man.
Why are you the way that you are?
I also think that the covers are kind of good, but they're also kind of weird. Like, they make the setting look post-apocalyptic instead of dystopian and war-torn. Granted, the line between those two is blurry, but like, I mean, look at these covers. They straight up look like they could be a screenshot from The Last of Us. It doesn't give off quite the right vibe, I don't think. But I don't know. That's all. So we're getting to the summary. Spoilers ahead.
Dude, if you were Polish and you jacked off, that would be a Polish pole polishing.
So we'll start with Book 1, Article 5. Ember, the main character, is a 17-year-old girl who lives in Louisville. It's America a few decades in the future. There was a big war recently that wiped out large parts of the country. How much of the country was wiped out, it's never really said. Like, at one point someone says 2/3 of America is gone, but that would not make any kind of sense. And they don't say if they mean 2/3 as in 2/3 of the territory is uninhabitable or 2/3 of the population died. It's not clear. After the war, religious conservatives took over the government, annulled the Constitution, and replaced it with religious laws. How bad are these religious laws, and how bad is the new government? Well, Ember mentions in the first chapter that she had a classmate named Caitlin who skipped school one day to celebrate Passover because she was Jewish, and then she got arrested and was never heard from again. And the country has also been isolated from the rest of the world, so it's very difficult to travel and there's not that much trade anymore. Poverty, homelessness, unemployment, starvation are all very, very bad. And that's all on top of the evil government. So Ember lives with her mom and no one else. It's just the two of them. They are reliant on government rations, and they're generally just scraping by, same as most people right now. Like, it's actually mentioned at one point that the evil government managed to get some people on their side by pausing mortgage payments, and Ember says that they would have been their house would have been repossessed by the bank and they would have been evicted if it weren't for that. Now, Ember doesn't actually know her dad. Her mom is a free spirit who has a lot of short-lived relationships with abusive or otherwise shitty men. Like, we see in flashbacks that her last boyfriend before the events of the story was physically abusive with her. And my first thought upon hearing that Ember didn't know who her dad was that he would come back at some point and he would either be a high-ranking member of the evil government or some sort of important person in the rebellion. But no, actually, he never comes back up. He's barely even mentioned. Like, he doesn't matter to Ember, and he doesn't matter to the story. Kind of a nice surprise, actually, because that is just how life is sometimes. You know, sometimes people have a shitty relationship or no relationship with their parents, and that just doesn't bother them because they know their parents are shitty people. So Ember is with friends one day, and when she goes home, soldiers arrest her and her mother. because Article 5 of the Moral Statutes, which again, the Moral Statutes are the new law of the land, states that children born out of wedlock are not real citizens, and having a child outside of marriage is illegal for both of the parents of that child. One of the soldiers that comes to arrest her and her mom is a boy named Chase. Now, Chase is their old neighbor who Ember was friends with for many years when they were children, and after his parents died a couple years earlier, he went to go live with his uncle, and they haven't heard much from him. The internet has been shut down, so they can't contact him. Now, Chase has a partner, and he's also there. His name is Tucker. He's about the same age as them, so like 18, maybe 19. And I have to mention him here because he eventually does become relevant. I'm not sure why soldiers have partners either. Like, they're not policemen, but okay, whatever. So Ember and her mom are arrested and then they're separated. Ember is taken to a rehabilitation center in West Virginia. It's basically a girls' preparatory school with very strict security. And she's supposed to stay there until she turns 18, which is only a couple months away. However, Ember is beaten for breaking rules not long after she arrives. It's not really that bad, actually. Like, she just holds her hands out and then the teacher, like, hits her with a switch on the back of her hands. Like, that's bad and unpleasant, but I don't know, the books feel like they treat it as a much bigger deal than it really is. But anyway, she resolves to leave and go and find her mom and reunite with her. There's another girl at the rehab center named Rebecca who at first seems completely straight-laced and like she's following all the rules because, again, she just wants to do her time and get out. But actually, she's sneaking off every night to have sex with one of the guards. The guard's name is Sean. So Sean and Rebecca agree to help Ember try and run if she agrees not to rat them out. And honestly, Sean and Rebecca both seem pretty nice. Like, they seem to have genuine feelings for one another, and that is only further confirmed as the book goes on. I'm not sure how old Sean is supposed to be, though. Like, we know Rebecca is under 18.
Move this man!
Okay, he's probably not that old. He's probably like 19. He's 20 at the very oldest. It's not that big a deal. It's fine. It's also confirmed that Ember's old classmate, Caitlin, the Jewish girl who got arrested, was at this school, and she actually attempted to escape but was killed in the attempt. So after being there for not very long, I think she's only there for a couple of days, Ember gets to leave. Like, Rebecca gets caught breaking rules, and she gets attacked and dragged off somewhere. And then Chase actually drives up to the school, and he has some forged paperwork, and he says, hey, I need to take Ember with me, and then he takes her in his car, and they drive off. And when they're away, he tells her that he has deserted from the army, and now he's helping her to meet back up with her mom. And that's it. They have escaped now. Like, Ember does nothing. So this is about 1/3 of the way through the first book, and from here on out, they are on the run until the end of the series. Now, Chase says that Ember's mom is free too, and that they'll meet her at a safe house somewhere else, and they just need to drive there. It'll take them a couple of days. Ember is kind of dumb for believing her mom is still alive, but she's also clearly not thinking. You know, she's desperate to find her only family, so she doesn't examine Chase's story too closely. But it is very, very obvious from this point that Ember's mom is already dead. So the two of them drive for a couple of days. They nearly get arrested when a married couple tries to turn them in for the bounty. They come across a bunch of soldiers massacring civilians too, and that's an interesting scene because, like, again, it's just a truck full of people who have already been arrested, and the army just drives them out into the middle of nowhere and then guns them down. It is a harrowing scene, probably the best in the entire series, just because of how well it hammers home the stakes, and it makes me want to see the rebels succeed. The two of them finally wind up in Knoxville. It's the last stop they're supposed to make before they go to the safe house. I'm not sure actually what this book thinks that safe houses are, because those are usually just temporary accommodations that you're at for a short period of time, and then you go off somewhere else where you're either out of reach of whoever's looking for you, or they're just unable to find you somewhere else. Like, you're only at a safe house for a little while, but the books seem to treat safe houses as somewhere where you go and then stay forever. Like, are Ember and Chase planning on fleeing the country? I don't know, it's really not clear. But anyways, they hide out in a resistance base in an old inn called the Wayward Inn. How does Chase know about this resistance base if he just left the army a few days ago? Because that's supposed to be a secret. How does he know? One of the Resistance members snaps at Chase and says he needs to tell Ember the truth about her mom. And this is where I need to correct something from an old video I put out several years ago. See, in my Abusive Things Love Interests Do Iceberg video, I claimed that Chase actually executed Ember's mom, and I thought that was insane that he would still be the love interest after that. But I was wrong. Her mom was arrested and taken somewhere, and Chase was actually ordered to shoot her. He was ordered to execute her, but he hesitated, and then he was right next to her when his partner Tucker pulled out a gun and shot her. In my defense, this scene is written very, very strangely. Like, I had to actually reread it twice this time around in order to understand what happens. It's written in a very strange way. So Chase is not just in love with Ember, and that's why he's trying to protect her, but he also feels immense amounts of guilt for being unable to save her mom, and with his last words to her, he promised to look out for Ember. So, oh yeah, he and Ember are in love. Like I said, they were childhood friends. They kind of just, throughout this trip, decide they're fully in love, and I don't know, it's not a particularly good romance, but it's not very bad either. Now, upon hearing about her mother's death and hearing about Chase being involved in it, Ember freaks out and she just runs off into the city and gets arrested. It is dumb for her to do that, but it's also kind of understandable. Again, like, she's been through a very traumatizing couple of days, and she just got the worst news of her life. It makes sense she wouldn't be thinking too clearly. And we reach like the last 10 or 15% of the book now, which is Ember finally doing things. She gets arrested and is sent to a local jail, and Chase goes out and tries looking for her, and he also gets arrested and sent to that same jail. Tucker is the warden. Tucker is in charge of this jail for some reason, and while Ember is awaiting her trial, which is almost certainly going to end in her being executed, he lets her out to do janitorial stuff, to clean the facility. Tucker is also attracted to Ember, and he's kind of aggressive about it. Like, he doesn't try to assault her, but he makes it clear that he could if he felt like it. So after that happens, Ember goes back to his office the next night and makes it seem kind of like she's interested in him and she might have sex with him. And while he's distracted, she actually steals his handgun. And I liked this scene because it's the first time in the entire book where Ember really stops and thinks her way out of trouble. So then she uses that gun to take Tucker hostage, get Chase out of his cell, and then take them all out to a place outside where they dump dead bodies. Now, she doesn't kill Tucker, which would be very understandable if she did, but she doesn't kill him. She just lets him go with a promise that he'll say Ember and Chase are dead to the other soldiers. Like, he'll just say, yeah, they tried to escape and I killed them.
That doesn't make sense.
Now, it's very dumb for Ember to do this, but it does very predictably backfire in the next book, so I can't say it's bad writing, really. And then Ember and Chase run off, and that's the end of book 1. Now, I kind of liked it more the second time around. Like, Ember doing things at the end was good, and some of the scenes of the government being evil hit pretty hard. Again, we straight up see them gunning down a bunch of civilians, like old people and women and even kids. Like, it's not pleasant. So it's a decent read, and it gave me hope for book 2, but unfortunately, once we get to book 2, Breaking Point, things do go downhill. Ember and Chase have been hiding at the Wayward Inn, which is the safe house they were at temporarily in the last book, for about a month, and they've managed to convince the army that they're dead, even though it's later confirmed that Tucker told the other soldiers that they escaped. Okay, so there's a sniper going around to different areas of different cities and attacking soldiers and killing them and then escaping before anyone can catch them. This was actually mentioned very briefly in the first book, and it becomes slightly relevant, sort of, eventually, sort of in this one, so I have to bring it up. So you might be wondering, if Ember and Chase have been hiding out at this Resistance safe house for a month, what have they been doing this whole time? Just hanging around? Yeah, they're not planning to flee the country, they haven't resolved to take down the government, they are just sort of existing. Although, to be fair to them, this entire Resistance cell isn't doing much either. They're really just stealing ration cards and then passing them out to people, and they don't seem to have much contact with their central leadership, they're just doing their own thing. So, yeah, they're not like planting bombs or attacking soldiers or anything. The sniper is apparently completely disconnected from the resistance. But also Ember is against doing anything to fight the government. She's like, violence is bad, but only sort of, a little bit. Like, I don't know. She has no motivation now. Like, if she wanted to flee the country, that would be totally understandable. If she wanted revenge for her mom, that would also be understandable, but she wants nothing, and it's very hard to root for a character like that. So the leader of this resistance cell is named Wallace, and he's a dumbass. Like, I'm not going to go into all the reasons why he's a dumbass, but you'll see some of them later, and mostly, he just seems like very ineffectual and just generally not the sharpest tool in the shed. Also, the soldier that Rebecca was sneaking off to have sex with in the first book, Sean, he's also here. Like, he's in the resistance now. So they putter around and exist for a while. Like I said, the sniper is still attacking. And finally, something happens. We hear about an assassination attempt on a government official. His name is Chancellor Reinhardt, and he is the chief of the Reformation, which means he's the one that's in charge of, like, bringing about all these new religious laws and enforcing them on people.
Shoot that guy.
Apparently someone planted a homemade bomb near him and it exploded, and he was wounded, but he survived. It is implied, and later on it's just straight up confirmed, that Reinhardt is the one that's really running the government. Like, they mentioned the president a couple of times. His name is President Scarborough, but he is very clearly just a puppet, and Reinhardt is the one that's really in charge of things. Now, this exposition should have been in the first book, but hey, I'll take it. It gives the world a little bit of dimension. Also, the Resistance is just called the Underground now, which is an unimaginative name. I guess calling it the Underground is better than just the Rebellion or the Resistance, but still, like, look at real-world rebel group names. You got stuff like the Lord's Resistance Army, the Wrath of Olives, Eagles of the Whirlwind, the Russian Orthodox Army, the Grey Wolves. Like, these are names that they stand out. That's what names do. They help you stand out, and they give you an idea of what the rebels are like. Giving them a generic name just makes them feel bland and boring. No one really knows who the leader of the entire underground is. Like, again, Wallace is the leader of this one cell, but there's someone who leads all of the cells and connects them, and his code name is just 3? Like, yeah, he's just called 3, which is dumb, but don't worry, it gets even dumber and more confusing in the last book. So the government puts out a warrant for Ember and the others, so I guess they know she's alive now, I don't know. Ember has a scene where, to disguise herself, she cuts her hair shorter and then dyes it black, and I know it's a joke that main characters of crappy YA dystopias always have a scene where they cut their hair, but at least in this one, it does make sense. Like, she's a wanted criminal, she's gonna disguise herself. So Ember and them go out to do underground stuff. They rescue a prostitute who's been badly beaten by soldiers and get her to safety. And while they're out there, the sniper attacks and there's chaos. During the chaos, Ember runs back to the inn without really doing anything of note. Again, she's just puttering around. So Tucker suddenly appears at the Wayward Inn, and he is now a member of the Underground. Like, he just shows up and says, hey, can I join your illegal insurgency organization? And they just go, yeah, cool. But when Chase sees him, there's a fight, and Chase actually pulls out a gun and nearly shoots him, but Wallace says, hey, Chase, you're not supposed to act like that, and then throws him out of the resistance. Like, she just throws him out, you know? Like, he takes this guy who has all this insider knowledge about you and just throws him out onto the street and assumes he won't go blabbing to the army. Like, normally when you find yourself on the bad side of a criminal organization, you wind up getting buried in a shallow grave, whether that's like the mafia or other organized crime or an actual insurgency, but you know, whatever. But Wallace very quickly forgives Chase anyways, so it winds up being a moot point. They all trust Tucker despite Chase and Ember's warnings. Like, Tucker just tells them, yeah, I got discharged from the army and now I'm here. And they don't question it further than that. Ember even tells them that he's a murderer, and Wallace responds by saying, well, he's not the only one, which, yes, that is true, but it also completely misses the point. This guy, Tucker, has given them no reason to trust him. Like, they just let people walk in off the street and let them join the resistance with no vetting. How has this cell not been discovered already? So there's a riot, and then the inn catches fire. Tucker helps Ember and Chase escape while Wallace and the others get into a shootout with some soldiers, and then they die. And Ember thinks, well, he helped us, so clearly Tucker isn't evil anymore. Just, look, spoiler alert, Tucker did set the fire. The only reason he helped Chase and Ember escape is, number one, he's still undercover, he's being a double agent here, but he also does genuinely care about Chase and Ember's well-being. Like, he's starting to catch romantic feelings for Ember, and Chase, despite everything, he was his partner, he was his friend. Now, after escaping, they stop to catch their breath, and this is when we get a retcon. Because Ember says that the war, which we never find out who the United States was fighting, they were just fighting other countries, but apparently that war didn't destroy the country, as we were led to believe before, insurgents did. But all the insurgents have been put down, like the insurgents destroyed the whole country, and that's what allowed Reinhardt to come to power, and apparently it's confirmed by the resistance that all of the insurgents got their weapons from Reinhardt and use them to do a bunch of false flag attacks, which is stupid for many reasons, because how would Reinhardt give out enough weapons to bring the country to the point of societal collapse without anyone noticing or spilling the beans? And also, how could insurgents overcome the American surveillance state and security apparatus to do any substantial damage? I don't know, just don't worry about it, I guess. So they decide that they need to leave town, and they hear that Ember's old house is now a resistance checkpoint. Basically, a checkpoint, as it's described in the book, is it's just a safe house. Like, they call it a checkpoint because it's a place you stop and hide out for a little while before you go to a safe house, which is your ultimate destination, but like that's a safe house. The person running the resistance safe house / checkpoint, whatever you want to call it, the person running it is operating under Ember's mom's name, so Ember thinks her mom might still be alive, which is, sure, yeah, whatever. If you survive the first bullet, then they have to let you go. That's how summary executions work. So they meet some other rebels, they take a stolen military vehicle, and they drive off. And at Ember's house, she runs into someone using her mom's name. It's Beth. You remember Beth, Ember's best friend, who I haven't mentioned because Ember hasn't mentioned her or thought about her once since the first chapter of the first book? Ember really, really cares about Beth.
Shut the fuck up!
Anyways, Beth is part of the resistance now, and she's actually the one that set up this checkpoint here. Because, at least she has agency and actually, does something. Now, Beth sees that Ember has a gun, and she's just shocked and appalled by this. Like, oh my god, you're part of an insurgency trying to overthrow the government. Why do you have a gun? And because this book is terrible, this becomes an actual argument between the two of them for a while. We're only about halfway through the book at this point, man. So they leave, and honestly, I don't think Beth ever comes back up for the rest of the series. Like, she's just gone now. So, did I mention they're heading to Chicago? Because they're heading to Chicago. It's a hub of resistance activity, and they find the underground cell that is operating there, and they introduce themselves. And Ember ingratiates herself with these guys by telling them all that she's the sniper, and they believe her for some reason. Like, this random teenage girl, they believe she's been able to evade the government and kill a few dozen soldiers by herself. Now, by this point, we do know the identity of the sniper. It's a different member of the resistance named Kara. I haven't actually mentioned her because she doesn't actually do anything. Look, the whole sniper subplot is pointless and means nothing, but the books think that by pretending it matters, that'll make it actually matter. Also, they are in Chicago to rescue Rebecca, who is held prisoner there. Like, remember, she got taken away from the rehab facility in the first book? Like, Ember found out that she was taken to Chicago, so they decided to come here to try to rescue her. And so Sean actually has to seem to remind them that they care about her, which says a lot. So while they're at the resistance base, a bomb goes off, which is later revealed to actually be a missile, and Ember is trapped under some rubble. While she's there, she sees an apparition of her mother's spirit, and it's unclear if it's real or not, because characters mention the spirit world a few times, but nothing supernatural ever happens in this series, so I'm leaning towards her seeing her mom just being her imagination / a dream / a hallucination, but I don't know, it's not made very clear. Tucker digs Ember out of the rubble, and then she just leaves and doesn't help any of the other people who might need help. And finally, they go to a nearby prison and they rescue Rebecca. Now, she actually can't walk because she's suffered horrible abuse from her time at the facility. She has a spinal injury, so she can't walk anymore. They take her and they leave, and as they're leaving, a single soldier tries to stop them. Chase tries to talk him down, there's a fight, and then the soldier winds up getting shot, and Ember is just watching this whole time. They get smuggled out of Chicago, and they go to what they refer to as a safe house, but it's actually an entire town that the Resistance controls in secret. Like, it's just, there's large parts of the country that, again, were apparently destroyed, and now they're abandoned, and the military has their forbidden zones. And just in these forbidden zones, there's an entire town out in the open that the Resistance controls in secret. Somehow. But when they arrive there, they see that the town has been destroyed. Like, someone ratted them out and the military hit them with a missile. And then they run off, and that's the end of book 2. Then we go to book 3, which is just called 3. There's a reason for that name, but even with that reasoning, it's still very dumb and very lazy. It reminds me of the first book of Swords. So they're running around in the part of the country that is abandoned and forbidden. It's blocked off by the military because it was destroyed in the war. Again, doesn't make sense, but entire states and cities are forbidden for people to go to. Because, you know, they just want to give up on enforcing the law in those areas and give guerrilla fighters a base to operate from and flee to. That makes perfect sense. While they're going through the ruins, some people ambush them. Amber stabs a man with a fork in the fighting, and then they quickly realize, oh, this is Chase's uncle. His name is Jesse, but I think I'm just going to refer to him as Chase's uncle. He's there along with a few survivors from the safe house that they were originally headed to. And so they all find out that, okay, we're all friendly, and they start traveling together. Then they're ambushed again by yet more Resistance fighters who are also friendly. And these guys are led by someone named Dr. Adrian DeWitt, who was a suspect in the sniper attacks. And it turns out that he's 3. He's the leader of the Resistance, or one of them, at least. Like, 3 is the name of the Resistance group now. And it's also the name of the leadership council, or whatever you want to call that. And 3 is also the code phrase they use to identify each other, because good code phrases are words that could be used in just about any context. And I just want to take a second to point out that at the end of book 2, the heroes were fleeing to a secret Resistance base after the military destroyed their last one, and then they spend the first 20% of book 3 fleeing to a secret Resistance base after the military destroyed their last one. Kids love repetition. Now, just like in the last book, they stay at this base and they just sort of exist for a while. You know, Ember decides that she loves Chase. She decides that Tucker isn't evil. She doesn't really like Chase's uncle because she views him as abandoning Chase, but I don't know, the reality is a bit more complicated than that. He really just couldn't take care of Chase. But oh no, the government found out where all of 3, like remember, the Resistance is just called 3 now. That's such a dumb name. The government found out where all of 3's secret bases are and are destroying them with missiles, but they're only destroying them one at a time though, because they want to give the heroes time to fight back. Now Reinhardt makes an announcement. Remember, Reinhardt, the big bad, the guy who runs the government. He announces that Resistance members have been arrested and some of them have already been executed. And so the Resistance decides, okay, we should spread our message, because apparently they haven't been doing that already. It's actually Ember's idea. They've never done this before. A lot of people seem to not realize that 3 exists, and many somehow also don't know about the government's rehab centers or prisons or mass executions. And I really don't have words to describe just how frickin' dumb that is. The idea they come up with is that they're going to tell Ember's life story and also pretend that she's the sniper so that they can inspire people to rise up. They're going to write it out and put it in the moral statute pamphlets that get passed out, because apparently no one pays much attention to those, so it'll go unnoticed, but also if no one pays attention, how are they going to see the message? I don't know. Now, the former president is also with the rebels. Not President Scarborough, the current president who's not really in charge of anything. The guy before him is also there. It doesn't lead to anything, but he's there. Tucker gets captured, and he's used as bait to lure others into an ambush. Why do they trust him? It doesn't make much sense for them to trust him, but the author says he's a good guy, so everyone else believes he's a good guy. Now, during the fighting, Ember shoots somebody, but only in the leg. You know, we want to make sure she remains morally pure. She's participating in a war. She would not want her to, you know, end someone's life. That might leave an impact. And after the fight, she comes across Kara, who, remember, is the real sniper, who she thought was dead but is apparently still alive. And Kara lets it slip that 3 is planning some sort of attack. You see, Reinhardt is throwing a big party with some other government officials, and they're planning to execute the captured rebels there, which includes Chase, and Chase's uncle, and Dr. Adrian DeWitt, because we really care about all those guys, right? And basically they're going to somehow take over a missile control panel and launch a missile and hit Reinhardt's party with it. Ember is shocked and appalled by this, and she has a long internal monologue about how evil 3 is for trying to assassinate the dictator who has killed her friends. And she literally says, "You're just another group of insurgents."
Shut the fuck up!
I can understand wanting to rescue the prisoners. I can understand wanting to rescue Chase and the rest of them before they get killed, but everything else she says is dumb. It's very, very strange. And it's also strange that she's blaming the insurgents for everything when she already knows the truth about how Reinhardt came to power. So she steals a gun, she holds up some other rebels, and then she runs off and resolves to go to the base where Reinhardt currently is and where he's going to hold the party and rescue her friends. But she's captured again very quickly by the army because Tucker betrayed her, and she's somehow surprised that he betrayed her. She literally goes, "I thought he was good." And then she's taken to the base in Charlotte, North Carolina, where Chancellor Reinhardt is. Tucker helps her escape from her holding cell, though. He doesn't want her to try and help the others. He just wants her to run. He wants to take her to the edge of the base and then give her a way to escape. But Ember is, she's there for a reason. She's there to rescue her friends. So she dresses as a prostitute and blends in with a bunch of others to sneak into the party. And the rebels who have been captured are forced to beat each other to death while an audience cheers. For some reason, Ember slips a knife to Chase's uncle and undoes his bonds, and then he goes and kills Reinhardt. A fight breaks out as the prisoners are trying to escape, a missile hits the base, which destroys some of it, and Amber manages to save some people and run off. During all of this, Chase is wounded, and Tucker is also wounded, but Tucker decides to drive them to a hospital before he succumbs to his wound, so Chase lives and then Tucker dies. Then we cut ahead a few weeks. President Scarborough has taken over after Reinhardt's death, and he is actually a very reasonable leader. Like, he repeals the old laws, he stops executions of article violators. It's kind of weird that he was just apparently okay with all of that before, but whatever. He stops all of that. And then Ember visits Tucker's grave and muses about him for a bit and thinks like, he was kind of evil, but he was my friend. And she doesn't really seem to grasp that he executed her mother. She seems to have forgotten about that. Ember and Chase arrange travel out of the country. I think they go to Mexico at the end, but they don't specify. They just leave the country, and then they immediately run into a guy who's speaking Spanish, who's going to be their guide. And then they just leave their old life behind, and they're going to start a new one. They also take an annoying child who's been there for a while. His name is Billy, but he's unimportant. And that is the end. That's the end of Article 5.
Yeah, can I have a dozen red roses, please?
Oh, hi, Johnny. I didn't know it was you.
So as far as protagonists go, I'd rather have one I hate than one that is just boring. Ember is weird because she's mostly boring, but sometimes she's just inconsistent. Because she's poor, but at the same time she feels very sheltered. She seems unaware of how the world works, and she's lacking in street smarts. Like, in the summary for the first book, Ember sounds like someone who grew up in a nasty environment and has adapted to survive in that environment. But she also doesn't know about the resistance at first. Like, she knows that something bad is happening to the people who disappear, so she's not that dumb, but she's also shocked every time something bad happens. She's shocked when the rehab center she gets sent to has strict rules. She's shocked when they beat people there. She's shocked when she sees the resistance steal ration cards. She's shocked when she learns they're going to kill Reinhardt. Like, other than a few small parts of the story, she mostly just stands around being shocked and getting pushed around by other characters. Now, a trend I've noticed, and don't get mad at me for pointing this out, this is just something I noticed, is that women authors give their protagonists far less agency than man authors do, regardless of the protagonist's gender. For example, if you look at Agatha Christie mysteries, they usually just have the protagonists stumble upon evidence for the crime or overhear stuff that helps them solve the crime. Or same with Harry Potter. Harry just sort of stumbles across all the answers he needs to solve whatever riddle or mystery he's dealing with. There's a really crappy book that's not that well known called Dance of Shadows by Yelena Black that exemplifies this problem in my mind. I read it many years ago, but I didn't finish it because it was bad enough that reading it was one of the reasons I started this frickin' channel, so I could complain about stuff like that to people. But basically, it's about the main character's sister disappearing, so she goes to a ballet school to find out what happened to her, and then she just sits around and lets others feed her information about the mystery. So it's really, really boring, and main character girl doesn't seem to have any drive or personality. Compare that to mystery books that are written by men, like the Jack Reacher books written by Lee Child. He has Jack Reacher actively go out and search for things, or actively go out and interrogate people to try and figure out what's going on. Now, reactive protagonists can work okay sometimes, like Katniss in The Hunger Games was a reactive protagonist, but that was probably deliberate. You know, that's a story about symbols and how propaganda works and how war affects people. Ember is boring because she never does anything, things just happen to her. And even by the end, she's not committing to destroying the evil government, which is like the most basic element of a protagonist in this genre. Now, anime belongs in the trash, but there are two anime that demonstrate this kind of issue. Guilty Crown and Code Geass. Both of them are about teenagers fighting an evil government, just like Article 5 and the many other dystopian young adult clones of the early 2010s. In Guilty Crown, the protagonist has to be dragged into the rebellion against his will, whereas in Code Geass, the protagonist joins willingly and goes to ruthless lengths to take control for himself, because his hatred for the enemy is so strong, he's willing to not only risk his own life, but to kill innocent people in order to destroy them. Now, it does make sense for a regular teenager to want to stay out of a war, but it's way more interesting to watch a protagonist that wants to fight. Ember could be reactive in the first book. You know, she gets arrested for literally nothing and is just trying to get back to a semblance of a normal life, but the fact that she doesn't commit to doing anything makes her boring. You know, what if instead of just sort of sitting around and saying, oh, the resistance shouldn't be doing violence to take down the evil government, what if instead of that, Chase in the second book wants to flee the country and she decides she wants to join the resistance against his advice, and he's like, oh, come on, Ember, this is a bad idea, but he also stays there to keep an eye on her and protect her. There are some Resistance members that go by code names, not all of them, but some of them, and what if Ember decided, okay, I want to go after the people who killed my mom, so she gets a new code name. Let's say she calls herself Louisville, because that's where she's from, and she, cuts her hair and begins acting differently and starts thinking like, well, Ember couldn't kill people, but Louisville can. Like she goes through some character development. And then eventually she realizes she's going too far with it, and at the end of the series she does leave the country with Chase, and that ends pretty much the same way. You wouldn't need to change that much, you would just need to include Ember doing resistance things instead of sitting around. She also might have been a better character if she actually did something to get arrested, because she's literally only arrested because she was born to parents that weren't married. Like, she's arrested for being a bastard. But what if instead of that, she kissed a boy in public and was arrested for indecency? Like, we would still feel the injustice of it because she did nothing wrong, but she still did something. She would make a choice. Her being arrested for an immutable characteristic feels like the oppression of an ethnic minority, but the books never really grapple with that. They never have Ember stop and go, oh, people hate me for this thing about myself that I was born with and I can't help, How does Ember see herself? Like, does she harbor any self-hatred over being a bastard? Because Jon Snow in Game of Thrones has a lot of mental issues stemming from that. That's why he joined the Night's Watch, because he knew he would never really be a part of the Stark family. And as much as he cared about his dad and his siblings, he just wasn't welcome there. Strangely, the books keep introducing characters that would be much better protagonists than Ember. Like, we have Ember's mom, we have Chase, the boy who lost his family, joined the army, and then deserted to save the girl that he loves. And that's not even counting all the crime he did before he joined the army. We have Chase's uncle, who's a badass freedom fighter. We have Sean, the wayward soldier. We have Tucker, the loyalist who still betrays the cause in small ways because he wants to save his loved ones. We have Beth, Ember's best friend forever, who decided to set up a safe house after Ember was arrested. We have Caitlin, the Jewish girl who was only mentioned a couple of times. We have Adrian DeWitt, /3, the leader of the resistance. We have Rebecca, who helps Ember escape in the first book and faces actual consequences for it. Like, they all have more complexity, more depth, and do more interesting stuff than Ember does. One thing I kind of liked about Ember, or more about her relationships with others at least, is that the love triangle doesn't really take up much time. Like, there's barely even a love triangle here at all. Like, Ember and Chase never waver in their love for each other. Basically, by the end of the first book, they have determined that, yes, we are in love, and they never deviate from that. And Tucker clearly has feelings for Ember, but his feelings are only implied. Like, he never makes a confession of love to her or anything like that. We're just left to infer from his actions that, okay, yeah, he clearly has feelings for this girl. Other than the part where he threatens to sexually assault her, but I don't think that really counts as having romantic feelings for someone. But having the love triangle just not take up that much time is one of the few redeeming things about Ember and her relationships with others. I feel like all of the pieces for an interesting character are there, the author just needed to assemble them. And there are different ways that she could have assembled these pieces. Some of these ways to assemble them would have been better than others, but doing anything would be better than doing nothing. You know, Ember as a protagonist is boring because the author lacks commitment with her. By trying so hard to make her relatable to everyone, she winds up being relatable to no one.
I was like, damn, how do I stay impartial? All of this looks so bad.
So I don't expect a young adult novel to showcase an expert knowledge of guerrilla warfare, or conventional warfare, or anything of that sort, but if you're going to make a war a central part of the conflict of your book, you should at least try to understand how these things work. You know, we have 3, or the Resistance. They are the worst rebel group I have seen in fiction, and there is some stiff competition for that. Again, most people don't even know that they exist. They aren't even trying to get their message out until Ember comes along. 3 is so incompetent, I half expected there to be a twist about them being secretly controlled by the government. Now, they at least have clear goals. You know, they want to overthrow the new government and replace it with the previous democratic one. And they're even planning on installing the previous president, although that winds up not happening. So they have a goal, and how do they achieve that goal? They hide in the wilderness, and then they just sort of sit around. And then they, at the end, get the ability to launch missiles, and they try to assassinate Reinhardt, which, just to be clear, that plan of theirs in the climax would have worked fine with or without Ember. You know, like, even if she hadn't gone off and tried to rescue the prisoners, they still would have launched the missiles and Reinhardt still would have died. The only difference would be that some of the Resistance members would also be killed in the explosion. Other than that final plan, though, what were they doing? They weren't ambushing army patrols or planting bombs anywhere. They just exist until the main character arrives, and then they succeed without her. Like, are they fighting a war or not? Like, when Reinhardt is killed, he would still have millions of supporters or sympathizers throughout the country. In fact, most of the government should be run by people who see things the same way as Reinhardt does. Even if President Scarborough is able to take control and change things, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense because why didn't he do it earlier, the threat of a new uprising or a coup or something would be pretty high. Like, my point is, just killing the one guy in charge isn't going to end the conflict. Like, you would need to wear down the security apparatus, that is the army and the police, and make the government either unable to continue the war or convince them that the cost of continuing the war was too high. And then you negotiate a surrender or a ceasefire or, you know, something. Like, Karl von Clausewitz said it best, war is politics by other means. Setting aside the overall conflict, though, smaller battles and smaller conflicts just don't add up. Like, nothing with the sniper makes sense. One person working alone would not be able to find and attack that many soldiers without being caught very quickly. Even somebody who was trained, which Ember is not at all trained. She doesn't have any special forces or army experience or anything, so it's weird that people believe her when she claims this. But I don't know, the whole sniper subplot feels kind of like it's trying to be similar to the South Armagh sniper in Ireland, but the thing is, despite the name, the South Armagh sniper was teams of men working in concert to attack soldiers and cops. Like, they were teams of people who had training, had weapons, had a support network. And they largely succeeded. They restricted the occupying army's movements. And the reason they succeeded was not just because, again, it was teams of people working together, but also because they were working in one small area of one county. A sniper going around targeting soldiers when there's a full-scale rebellion going on probably wouldn't even make the news, but they're going around to like different cities and different states and stuff, and there's a bunch of radio broadcasts talking about it. I don't know, Article 5 has the unimportant characters sit around in the background so the heroes can take care of everything, except the heroes don't do anything either. And then after the climax, all the military's bases are taken over by civilians. Like, it's not even that members of 3 storm the bases and fight the soldiers and take them. Like, just civilians read Ember's pamphlet and they read about her life story and are inspired to just run at the bases and take them over. And for some reason they don't get massacred, which we've already seen soldiers are perfectly willing to do to people. Realism is a stylistic choice. It's not really good or bad, and realism is a very broad spectrum, from ultra-realistic to ultra-unrealistic, but wherever you fall on that spectrum, you should generally stick to it, because the beginning of this series went for a gritty, dark realism, sort of, and then just abandoned it. Like, the author didn't want Ember to be an action protagonist, and I guess that's fine. And if the author didn't want Ember to be an action protagonist, I guess that's fine. There are many ways to resist an authoritarian government non-violently. The OSS actually published a sabotage field guide in World War II. Here are some of the suggestions it offers, and just to be clear, this is a real document that was really produced by the United States military. Make speeches. Talk as frequently as possible and at great length. Illustrate your points by long anecdotes and accounts of personal experiences. Never hesitate to make a few appropriate patriotic comments. When possible, refer all matters to committees for further study and consideration. Attempt to make the committees as large as possible, never less than 5. Misunderstand orders. Ask endless questions or engage in long correspondence about such orders. Quibble over them when you can. Act stupid. Cry and sob hysterically at every occasion, especially when confronted by government clerks. Again, this is a real thing. The point is, Ember and 3 could have done a lot without resorting to guerrilla warfare. And on the other side of the equation, the government's actions don't make sense either. They're just sort of massacring civilians and sending missiles at resistance bases, which, again, the resistance bases are all just out in the open. You can't bomb an insurgency into submission. I'm sorry if this is your wake-up call, but that's not how it works. You can't do that. Governments that successfully put down insurgencies are ones that address the grievances of the population and undercut the insurgency's reasons for existing. That's why the United Kingdom was able to bring the war in Northern Ireland to a close while the Soviets and Americans both failed in Afghanistan, and why the Americans failed in Vietnam, and why Rhodesia is called Zimbabwe now, and why Hamas still exists. That said, there is still a combat portion to counterinsurgency operations. It's not all just like building schools and trying to get people on your side. The combat portion of COIN usually involves combining police and military tactics, because those institutions have to work together to restore law and order. Like, imagine if Ember and the others, instead of being afraid of distant missiles, were afraid of raids by the army. Like, there's a video game called Homefront: The Revolution, which is a video game about guerrilla fighters, and that one literally starts off with a raid. How much more terrifying would the soldiers be if we knew they could do that? Not just massacre unarmed civilians, but also track down and kill/capture resistance fighters. But we don't get anything like that, so the entire war aspect of this story, which is supposedly about war, feels perfunctory. I will say one thing in Article 5's favor, and that's that these books don't shy away from the evils of this world that they've created. Ember and Chase witness the government massacre a bunch of civilians in the first book. And even before that, we know what they do to religious minorities and other people who fail to conform. At first, the government as this looming presence, because that's what it is in the first book. It's just this looming presence in the background, and at first, it works pretty well. But then we stop seeing them do horrible crimes, and so the shock sort of wears off. So we're just left with Reinhardt as the head of the government to be the villain. But then he also has no screen time. You know, characters don't even see him in person until the climax of the final book. He just makes some speeches and doesn't have much real presence. What can I say about his ideology, his motivations, his backstory? Nothing. Like, he's just a religious conservative. There's nothing else to him. And as soon as he's gone, everyone else decides they don't want to be in a dictatorship anymore. Like, people like Reinhardt only come to power because the population agrees with what they're doing, or the majority of it, or at least a large and powerful minority of it. Article 5 could have explored how these sorts of ideologies come to fruition and what people find appealing about them, and then the books could, refute those beliefs, like make it clear that most people just want to be left alone and people like Reinhardt are neurotic losers who want everyone else to be just as soulless and cruel as they are. Like, you could have done that. And it would have been nice as well if they went even harder into the fact that this is the United States. Like, even though the villains are American religious conservatives, at no point in the series, I don't think a single person ever says, "God bless America." Like, if they did that and said other common phrases, it would help hammer home that, yeah, this isn't a totally fictional world. It has a lot of elements of the real world. I know throughout this whole video I've been referring to the military as just the military or the army, but that's really for the sake of simplicity. In the books, the heroes actually fight the moral militia because the military and the cops were all dissolved and replaced with the moral militia, or the MM as it's often called, because that sounds intimidating. But what if instead of fighting this fictional militia, the characters were fighting American cops and American soldiers? Make it clear that these are American cops, American soldiers, American insurgents, and American civilians that are all killing each other. That would drive home the horror and the tragedy of the situation. But most of the villains are just husks that exist in the general vicinity of a conflict, with one exception: Tucker. Tucker is not a great character, but just by virtue of having some personality and some depth to him, he is the best in the series. Because he is loyal to the evil government. He is genuinely loyal to them, but he also cares about Chase, even though Chase is a traitor, because, well, Chase was his friend. And he has feelings for Ember and wants to protect her, despite her being a filthy rebel.
Rebel scum.
So he's torn between these two sides, and just by having internal conflict at all, he becomes a much deeper character than all of the others. It's very dumb for the Resistance to let him join and trust him without doing any sort of vetting, but at least he does help move the story forward. He sets the inn on fire, he gives locations of Resistance bases, he helps set up ambushes that get others captured, things like that. And if the book's committed to Tucker being evil, he could have worked as an antagonist. But the way they kind of, sort of try to redeem him at the last second is clumsy. Because in the epilogue, when Ember is looking at his grave, she muses about how he lost his family and he saw the army as his new family, which seems like it's trying to explain his actions, but it also seems like it's trying to excuse his actions. And maybe he'd be sympathetic if they leaned into that idea, like he really didn't know any better and he was protecting his family from the rebels that were trying to kill them. That could be interesting, but Tucker just doesn't have enough screen time. He doesn't get enough focus to explore all of this. The contradictions in his character are really intriguing, and I want to see more of him, but apparently the author decided that Ember sitting around and doing nothing was more important. It's also kind of weird that he's in charge of things when he's like, again, 18 or 19 years old. Maybe the fact that a teenager is in charge of things in the army could be acknowledged by characters and used to make some sort of point. Like, hey, they're low on manpower because loyalty is more important than competence, and they keep killing officers out of paranoia. Give some reasons for why the government was ultimately so easy to defeat at the end. That might work, but I don't know, there's just nothing here.
I must break you.
So what's my final verdict on Article 5? Like, how would I sum up my thoughts on it? Well, parts of it were very poignant. The raw horror at what's going on is formidable at the start, and over the course of the first book, it just gets worse and worse. It's one of the few books in the young adult dystopian genre that really nails the evil part of evil government. But by the end of the series, it feels cartoony. Reinhardt has an extravagant party where the captured heroes will be executed, but first they have to fight to the death. The army is shooting missiles at the rebels, but they're giving us enough time to come up with a daring plan to save the day, you know? It just clashes with the earlier tone. There are a few moments that still carry the horror and dread, like in the last book, right before Ember infiltrates the party when she's dressed up as a prostitute, one of the other prostitutes warns her that the officers pay better, but they think they can do whatever they want to you in exchange for that pay. Like, that implies so much about what this woman has gone through and what sort of people the villains are without being too explicit for kids to read. And I think the ideas and themes of this story are pretty good. They just mostly get ignored after the first book. And normally that could be okay, because then we could just focus on, you know, the story and characters, but those are so thin that there's not much to enjoy there. I don't know exactly how to explain or summarize my thoughts on Article 5. You know, it seems like a generic YA dystopia, and yet there is something else there. You know, the social and political commentary is half-assed, but it's there. Ember and Tucker and even Chase feel like they're on the cusp of being interesting characters, but they just don't take that final step. The heroes being on the run almost the entire series makes them feel vulnerable in a way you don't see often, but there's just nothing here to hold it all together. You know, it's like I said about Ember's character, the pieces were all there for a good character, they just weren't assembled. I feel the same way for the series as a whole. The pieces were there for a very good book series, but they weren't assembled. Do I recommend you read Article 5? Hell no. I am kind of glad I read it though, because as bad as many of these YA dystopias are, I keep coming back to them. Partially because they are nostalgic, like this is what was big when I was a teenager and it puts me back into that mindset, but also partially because they're funny. You know, some of the dumb stuff is amusingly dumb, but I think the biggest reason I keep coming back to them is that they're hopeful. You know, the final message is always that regular people have power. As small as we may feel, we are the ones that make the world go round. Tyrants and wannabe tyrants will always pop up, but they can only thrive if we let them. We don't have to comply because they can't force everyone to do so. Their regimes require people to do what they want preemptively. They can only afford to make an example out of a few people before the whole thing starts falling apart. They literally don't have the resources or ability to enforce their draconian whims on every regular person out there. Because without us, they are nothing. And even if you aren't getting into shootouts with the army, you can always undercut them in other ways. Even if the only way you can undercut them is by voicing your distaste at everything they stand for. No one can force you to change your mind. No one can force you to believe their lies. No one can force you to reject the evidence of your eyes and ears and say that what you saw is not actually what you're seeing. I have no particular reason for saying all of this right now. Have a lovely day. Goodbye. Hello, if you made it this far, you're one of the elite few who has watched all the way through the video, and now you see these names here? These are the names of my patrons. If you want to get your name here, just send me money over on Patreon. It helps me keep the channel going. It gives you access to, you know, early videos and bonus videos every month and, you know, stuff like that. And my $10 and up patrons are Arthur D. Gonzalez Martin, Brothers Santotis, Carolina Clay, Chibs Ahoy, Ich bin Langweilig, Lexi Delorme, Lord Tiebreaker, Michael and Katie Hake, Mr. A5013, Proscriptions of Dwojang, Rovi, Psych XS, Slumbering Jellyfish Observing Outer Space, Tesla Shark, Toa Michael, Ve Victus, and Wesley. All these people, you're all great. If you're not on here, you know, you're still great. I appreciate you watching. Feel free to like the video, comment on it, share it around, subscribe to my channel if you haven't, and you know, check your subscription box every once in a while if you are subscribed. I don't know why people don't do that, but a lot of them don't. And, you know, just in general, keep on keeping on. Glad you're all here. Have a lovely day. Goodbye.